Hi everybody, my name's Aras. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Western Alliance. I'm very happy to be contributing to the STaRR resource for grant applications. And so as part of my role at Western Alliance, I've been involved with overseeing a large number of grant applications over the years. We've awarded around 70 different research projects with funding and have reviewed many more times that of applications. And so hopefully some of the tips I give you today will be useful from the perspective of a grant reviewer and sort of what we're looking for in terms of making a decision to allocate funding to research projects. So to start with, I guess I'm gonna talk through some different components of research submissions, and as I do that, I'll give you sort of some of the most common pitfalls that come up, and some tips and some, I guess, examples of how it can be done really well from the point of view of a grant reviewer, and then just finish with a couple of more general tips for writing research applications. So the first thing that a reviewer will read is the lay summary at the top, or the introduction. It depends on the grant that you're applying for, but that the section you get where you get to overview your whole proposal in one little bit, which is not easy, but this is ultimately your elevator pitch. So if you were meeting someone in the street and they said, "Oh, what do you do?" And you said you're a clinician or a researcher and you're putting in this grant application, and this is what it's about. It's what you would tell them in a short space of time. It's super important. And I would suggest you test this pitch both verbally and what you write down with a number of different people, and especially those who aren't across the area that you're researching or not across research at all. So it does need to be something that the layperson can understand. And bear in mind that we now at Western Alliance have consumers on all of our grant reviews. So it really needs to be something that any lived experience consumer could pick up and understand what you're trying to achieve. So the lay summary often misses the mark in terms of, one, there's still often too much jargon involved in a lay summary, but really the most important thing is you should be able to read that whole lay summary and know everything that is going to happen from a research perspective, not in depth, but from an overview perspective. So I should be able to pick that up and have a fair idea as to whether the research you're proposing hits the mark for what we're trying to fund. Super important. The next big thing, and this in my mind is probably the most important thing and the thing that's missed the most often in grant applications. And that is when you have the opportunity to justify your problem or the issue that you're trying to address with research. So people are often quite good at bringing that back to the literature and sort of research evidence as to why it is a problem. But what is really missed all the time is justifying using data that is a problem at your local level. So if you are a clinician in a health service, and I'll give the example of say you're trying to reduce falls in your hospital. What often happens is someone will say falls are a major issue in Australia. They cost, millions and billions of dollars. And what they won't put is there are X number of falls that happen per year in our organization, or X number on this ward. And this is worse than other similar health services. So that benchmarking bit is really important if you can include it. The reviewer wants to know that really the magnitude of this problem that you're proposing. They want to see that this is a priority for you and for your organization and for the consumers at your health service particularly. And this same thing applies to community-based or population-based activities. So what is the local data that's led you to believe that this is a problem, and that's really kind of got you into action to try and address it using research. So please try and find that local data where you can. And if you can't find it, just say why not. Like, is that going to be part of the research you're doing is actually going to go and search this local data more? That might be a research project in and of itself. But in most cases, there needs to be justifiable reason why you're pursuing this research, and local data is a really good way to do that. The next, I guess, a big part of every research application is the methodology, and I'm not going to talk too specifically about what's right or wrong here. That's something that you'll learn in STaRR, and that you'll pick up through other programs that you might do. But what's really important for me when I'm looking at the methodology is that it matches your research question. So this is something that's often missed as well. So you put a research question in, you'll include your methodology, and then if everything goes according to plan, your answer, your question still won't be answered by your methodology. So please test that. Go back and look at if your research goes how you think it will go. Are you going to be able to answer that question that you've put at the very top there? I mentioned before that we have consumer reviewers as part of our grants now, and we also, as part of a lot of our grants, it is a sort of a mandatory component to demonstrate consumer involvement in the design and conduct of your research. So the gold standard here is to have consumers involved from the outset, so they are helping to kind of identify the problem and helping to shape what research is going to address that problem or find out more about it. So really involving consumers from the start is going to put you at an advantage from a grant perspective. And if you are simply in your grant saying that you're going to involve consumers later, it's still important, but it's going to be less powerful than the first example. And if you don't reference consumers, it's going to be really hard for your grant to get funded. Another, I guess, more administrative component is around budgeting. And what's often missed here is the detail. So you're better off having more detail than less detail in a budget. And so I often get applications that say, we're going to fund a position and we're going to allocate $20,000 to that for the next year and a half. And that's great. But what we really want to see is, okay, what is the per hour rate for this position or per week rate? How are you splitting that? What is that based on? So what's the award rate for this particular person who you're going to employ into this role? Does that include on costs, so peripheral costs like superannuation, etc.? And if not, who's covering that? Does it need to go into your in-kind section? So really hammering home here that you need detail in your budget. We want to know that the money that you're proposing to spend is there's a particular reason why you've come to those sums, rather than just trying to fit what's in the grant. So you need to be able to justify the timing and any other infrastructure costs that you're putting in. And then perhaps one of the other biggest parts of a research grant is the so what bit at the end. So it might be asked as impact or translation or outcomes or outputs. Really, this is your opportunity to say what your research, the specific research you're doing, what impact that is going to have. The most common pitfall we see here is that people can conflate what their specific research is going to do, as opposed to the bigger picture kind of reason behind their project. And I'll go back to falls as an example. So your falls project might be wanting to test with consumers whether a particular intervention is appropriate and acceptable to people who are having falls. And so in doing that, you might test that in a hospital and then come back with your data that says, yes, this is appropriate. No, it's not appropriate. Now, so your outcome there or your impact is that you now know whether this is an appropriate intervention to then go and implement and potentially evaluate. What you don't know from that is that that's definitely going to reduce falls or not. So what we often see is, the project might be testing the feasibility of an intervention, and then the impact is put down as we are going to reduce falls in our hospital. Okay. You've got to make sure that whatever you claim in that section is actually what you're going to be able to measure and test as part of your research. And in the example I just gave, they won't be able to say that that's the case. So just be very careful around what claims you put in your impact and think about it in terms of specifically what you're trying to achieve with your research. You can then put a statement that say, we then will do further implementation work, which we hope will reduce falls or which we expect based on the data and literature will lead to a reduction in falls down the track. So just be careful on how you frame that. So they're kind of, for me, the key components of a research grant that, often have pitfalls and can be addressed through the tips I've given. And I guess just in summing up, people tend to think going bigger is better with research grants. So often more complex, kind of larger scale research is seen less favorably by reviewers. One, because there's just so many risks involved with a large research project, and that if it's not resourced well enough by the grant, so it needs to fit whatever you're proposing really needs to fit the quantum of the grant and the kind of reason behind the grant. If that's not the case, if there's a mismatch, and so if you're trying to do too much, that will certainly look unfavorable to a reviewer. So in most cases, it's better to have something that's kind of neat and that you know can be achieved in sort of the timeframes that you're looking at. And with regard to timeframes, I would say 95% of research takes longer than people think. And so certainly the research that we've funded, that's the case, and I've seen it across the board. There are so many different things that can stall your research, like ethics approval, staff changeover. So build that into your timeline. I'm much happier to see a realistic time frame as part of a research proposal than something I know they're not going to achieve in that time. And if you're not sure about that, have a chat with other people who have really experienced that type of research before, and they'll give you a better indication as to what's an appropriate time frame. And that's it, I believe. So look, we really look forward to working with you over time and helping you to build your proposals and build your research grants. Certainly from a Western Alliance point of view, we're always happy to have a chat with you before you put in an application, just to steer you in the right direction and make sure that what you're looking to put in is appropriate for the grant that we have. We certainly don't want to waste anyone's time. And that's it. Thank you for listening, and I hope this has been useful. Cheers.